Okay, we are live. So, my name's Madeline Dyer, and I'm joined by Emily Colin. Hi.
Hey, hello.
um, yeah, we're just going to talk a bit about our books and like the upcoming books because Emily, you've got a release in July, haven't you?
I do, which is a little bit crazy. I don't know exactly what the world of book releases is going to look like in July. We know what it looks like now, which is not what it would normally look like for anyone. And there's all kinds of fantastic groups that are going online, organizing sort of virtual audiences and virtual book launches. I have a feeling by July we're not going to be back to normal. So I feel lucky that there's the people who were experiencing that, unfortunately, in March and April and May and June, all the time leading up to it. Maybe there will be some platforms in place by then, because I know for debut authors in particular, that's got to be so rough. It's your first ever book. You've been waiting years and years and years for it to come out, all your hopes, all your dreams, all your everything. And then, wah, 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 you can't do any events. So, yeah, we'll see. We'll see what that looks like. But despite all of that craziness, I am still really excited about the book. So,
Yeah, I've got your book on pre-order, so I can't wait to read it.
yay. Yay. This is my little heart shape for you.
Yes, do you want to just like tell people a bit about what it's about?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So this is going to be my first ever young adult YA book. So I have two other novels that are out, The Memory Thief and The Dreamkeeper's Daughter, and they both are for an adult audience. And I think of them as like love stories with a supernatural bent, or maybe supernatural stories with a romantic bent. I don't know. That depends on your perspective. But I love to read YA fiction as well. And I have, a huge, like a bookshelf in my house that's YA only. It's my YA shelf. And, I love to read it. I love to write it. And so that led me to wanting to write a YA novel of my own. So this one, the first one in it is Sword of the Seven Sins, and it's the first book in a trilogy. And the trilogy is called The Seven Sins, and it's sort of I'd say it's a dystopian romance with a fantasy angle to it as well. And it is about a society where people live and die by the rules of the seven deadly sins. And so, of course, my two main characters, who are a teenage male and female assassin, fall in love, which is a problem because that's punishable by death. So it was a lot of fun to write, very, very different from the other stuff that I write or I have written in the past. And now I've got book two, which is due to my publisher about 10 days after the first one launches. And that's new ground for me too, because I've never written a series before. So that's a whole other challenge. So, yeah.
It sounds really exciting, and I do love stories about assassins. At the moment, I'm reading Mask of Shadows by Lindsay Miller. Have you read
All right.
that one?
I haven't, but I've heard of it. Are you liking it?
Yeah, oh, it's amazing, and like the main character in that, she's training to be an assassin,
Oh,
and I just
maybe I
love
should read
assassin
it.
stories at the moment because like my most recent release, This Vicious Way, also has an assassin as a main character. So like I just keep reading books now. It's just like narrated by assassins, and I just love it so much.
There's just something about it. I don't know what it is, particularly if it's like a strong female character who's the assassin.
Yeah.
It like just sucks me in. Do you ever read anything by Sarah J. Maas?
No, I haven't, not yet, but she's on my TBR. So
Yes, she's got some great assassin stories. You would love it.
okay.
You would love it for sure. Awesome.
Yeah.
So what else are you working on? What are you working on now?
At the moment, I'm working on the second draft of my second young adult thriller. So, like, wow, I got the feedback from my critique partners not long ago, and I've just like completely ripped apart the manuscript since then, which is really fun, and I love doing that. But it just leaves me with like this really like huge mess to try and like edit and clear up. But it's quite satisfying when I know it's like all coming together.
So
So
what drove you to want to write fiction? Have you always written?
yeah, so I've always just loved telling stories and just being creative, and ever since I was little I've known that I've wanted to be a writer. So I started writing seriously when I was about 16, and then I got my first book deal when I was 19, with my first book publishing when I was 20. So I've just sort of continued on from there and just been really determined to keep writing. But like at the moment, I'm moving sort of into new territory with the thrillers because like all my other books were like dystopian or fantasy.
Oh yeah,
So
that
it's
is your
quite
favorite.
like, yeah, it's quite challenging, but I'm really enjoying it. And yeah, I'm going to be sending this second thriller to my agent soonish. So I'm excited to see what she thinks because like my first thriller, like it was just completely different to anything I'd written, and I really enjoyed writing it. And my agent loved it, so that was good.
Yeah, isn't that nerve-wracking? You send it off and then you're like, oh my God, what if they hate it? What if they hate it?
Yeah.
So what's different for you about writing a thriller than it has been about writing your dystopian or fantasy stories? Is it a different plotting practice? Is it a different structure, or is it just you doing all the same stuff but different creative things flow out?
Um, well, I guess when I was plotting my dystopians, they did sort of have a thriller plot to a lot of them. So
Mhm.
it's mainly just the world building that's really different because my thrillers are contemporary, and a lot of the time when I was writing my dystopians, I was getting so like caught up on all the world building and all like the rules that I'd set myself, and then I was worried about continuity errors with it. So with writing thrillers and like contemporary, like present day fiction, I haven't really got that worry about making sure that everything makes sense and I'm not contradicting myself.
So what did you
'Cause
do for your world building? Because this is a new thing for me because I have my dystopian, which like I told you has got the fantastical bent, and this one, my Seven Sins series, it's set in our world, but things have gone terribly, horribly wrong, and so you can see sort of like vestiges of our world, but things are not the way that they used to be, and so I've definitely, whereas in my other books, I would think that there's sort of, I wouldn't call them urban fantasy at all, but they're more like, here's our world, and then some of the laws of our world are not working quite the way we would normally expect them to, but it didn't require world building because it was more about like, okay, in this one, there's a ghost that's come back and possessed somebody else, but other than that, things just work the way that they should, except for somebody else's soul is inhabiting this body. And the other one, there's a little time travel element. So I just had to figure out, okay, how does the time travel piece work? But most of the time I was telling the story in the past. So I needed to figure out the historical research or current day. This is the first time where I've had to make up the rules for a whole world. And it's
yeah.
a little bit overwhelming, particularly with the second book in the series where I'm like, wait, did I say this was possible? Wait, what did I do? So how did you maintain the rules of your world for world building and like not mess up, not make this
Um,
continuity errors?
okay, so like, well, with my first book, book one of the series is called Untamed, and before I wrote a rough draft of that, I had like a very rough idea of what this world was. So you've got two types of people: you've got the untamed and the enhanced ones, and the enhanced ones take these chemical augmenters that are basically sort of like emotions, so they can choose what they want to feel. And in the society, negative emotions are outlawed, so you're only allowed to feel positive things all the time.
Hmm.
And they're hunting down the untamed people who are essentially like you and I, like, because like they're just the people who aren't enhanced and are still living by sort of like today's rules.
Right, right.
So I had that as like my basic premise, and I knew my main character was going to be a 17-year-old untamed girl. So it follows her like throughout the series. But with book one, I didn't know as much about the world building as I should have when I was writing it. I only knew sort of I knew all the immediate things that applied to that plot and some of like the background stuff as well. But then when I came to write book two, I realised that I needed to show like a new side to the world and introduce a new element of the world building and just like dive a bit deeper. So I ended up going back through book one and like just looking for like little details that I had mentioned like offhand, not really thinking much about them before,
Mhm.
but I could then expand on and make it look like, oh, I'd included those intentionally all along.
I'm doing the
So
same thing now, which is
yeah.
like, oh, wait a minute. In fact, I as I was starting to like, yeah, I'm working on, I guess you call it act two of book two now. And when I was in act one, there needed to be this important battle.
Mhm.
And all of a sudden I realized that like geographically, certain things needed to be in place for the battle to be more believable. Luckily, book one had not gone to press yet because I just added 3 or 4 sentences to book one and we were able to incorporate those. But I was like, oh my gosh, this is why people plot out the entire arcs, from the
Yeah.
very beginning. And I had the vague, like I had the synopses, but I hadn't really thought about like, okay, so if there's going to be a battle here, is this really where people would have put their, rebel camp, or and so thank goodness I was able to go back and make those little things happen. So even now I'm going back and looking for those little details to be like, oh, okay, so that could really be like a clue. So if that's a
Mhm.
clue, then I should develop this character in this way, but not this one. So yeah, it is. It's kind of fun in a Hansel and Gretel
Yeah.
kind of a way, but it's also a little bit crazy making.
Yeah, it can be quite frustrating if, like, you can't, like, exactly make it match up how you want to. Like, luckily with, when I was writing book 2, book 1 hadn't published yet, so I was able to sort of go back and add in a few things. But, 'cause it's a 4-book series, mine, and each book focuses on a different part of the world. So you've got, like, book 1 is very much about the untamed society. Book 2 is about sort of like mythology that the untamed people believe in and how that links in
Mhm.
with the overall world building. And then books 3 and 4, like, they become more traditionally dystopian and more political and looking at the world building from various aspects, with, like, book 4, like, taking on a more almost global view. And when I was writing book 2 and I had, like, all these problems with the world building that I hadn't really thought about when I was writing book 1, I then decided to plot the rest of the series. So I knew exactly, like, what would be happening later on. But I did find that quite difficult because I'm not a natural plotter. Like, I write a lot better and, like, more freely if I don't plot or plan at all, because then I'm just really excited by the story and I'm discovering it as I go along. So I think that's why I'm really enjoying writing thrillers at the moment, because like, they're all standalone ones, so I
Yeah.
don't, like,
Yeah.
need to worry about, like, future books linking in. So that's really sort of freeing for me at the moment.
See, it's just interesting that you say that because in my natural habitat, like
Mhm.
undisturbed by like writing constraints, I am sort of a pantser as well,
Mhm.
where I don't plot as such. Like I get really excited about maybe a line of dialogue between characters or a concept or I don't know, it could be anything like a visual image. And I start writing based
Yeah.
on that. And then I don't necessarily write from A to Z. I might get excited about like a scene 3/4 of the way through the book. And I write that. And then I'm
Mhm.
like, ooh, but this conflict between the characters. And I'm really excited about that. But it's in the first third of the book. So I write that. And I end up stitching the whole book together. And when I talk to most writers about that, they're like, oh my God, that would make me so crazy. What is wrong with you? Like, well, I'm very easily bored. And I'm like the sort of
Yeah.
person who does better like I do have really great startup energy, and then unless and my continuity energy is not as great as my startup energy. So I have to like keep my startup energy going throughout, and that's how
Yeah.
I've done it. But the thing is, like, I have realized that my strength is in the character building, and sometimes I can pick apart other people's plots, no problem. But when it comes to my own plots, I sometimes realize I've gotten so involved in the conflict between the characters that like the plot is not as strong as it could be. And particularly with writing with that a little bit here, a little bit here, like
Yeah.
magpie style writing, I'm like, oh, the shiny things, but then the plot doesn't hold together or progress as well as it should, or there's a lot of extra, and I have to kind of be like and carve it out. So I really like, particularly when you're working on deadline, of course, which I am for this, and then it being a series, I'm trying to take another approach. So I'll turn this so you can maybe see it. See that? See that behind me?
Oh, yeah.
Yep. So
Mhm.
this is my plot board, which I've never used anything like that before ever in the history of me. And I've like outlined it, and I've tried to do this like act one, act two, act three structure. But I'm very curious to see. It feels so unnatural. Like it feels like I'm trying to like put on clothes that someone says are supposed to fit, but really they're like for someone with like 8 heads and like an arm and a half and whatever. I'm like, this does not work for me. But I'm really curious to see if I can make myself power through it, if it'll start to feel more natural, and if in the end what I produce will sort of not manifest those same challenges. I'm sure there'll be different challenges, but so I'm curious about that, and then I sort of have like another project that I'm working on that's just like overspill, like free range creativity, where I don't have to. I'm not trying to follow that same structure. So yeah, it's curious to me. I also think that writing the way that I do, which is that little bit at a time and the not being so plot focused or not having a structure, it doesn't enable me to write as quickly. And so I'm hoping that taking this approach, even though it feels constraining, will allow me to kind of be more productive and get this project done so I can move on and complete the other one that I'm excited about too. So
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know. We'll see. It's new. It's all new.
Mhm. It'll be interesting to hear your thoughts on this after you've finished that draft to see like how well it has worked with what
Yeah,
you're expecting.
it's weird. It's like I've never normally when I write a first draft, I'm pretty exacting with it. You know, I'm not someone who just kind of like pumps out a first draft. I'm like, okay, well, it's not quite right, but I'll like worry about that later when I go back through. I like
Mhm.
focus more on like trying to get it right one scene at a time. And this is not that. This is more just like,
Right.
all right, this is the scene about this. I'm writing it, moving on to the next scene. The scene's supposed to be about this. Okay, I'm writing it. And of course, I go back through and I look at it, but it's totally different. And it's kind of nice to be experimenting with something new. So we'll see.
Yeah, I definitely agree about experimenting because I find that more creative, well, the more I experiment, the more creative I am. Like, not just in sort of a new form or genre that I'm experimenting in, but then even when I go back to write a genre that I'm more familiar with, I'll then find that or I'll feel that I'm more creative. I don't know whether I actually am, but it will just feel like that way.
So when you what's your writing process like? Do you have the same process for every novel that you approach aside from the world building piece, or is it different for every novel or
It does vary, but like I suppose on a very basic level, it's pretty much the same. But I will get like an idea that I'm excited about. I'll make a few notes and then I'll just dive straight in and just wait for the characters to like come to me, for them to show me what the story is about. So it's often not until I finish the first draft that I know what I'm actually writing about. And
Mhm.
I'll know the shape of the manuscript and like the shape of the plot. And then that then allows me to sort of like have a better idea of where to go on the second draft and like all the bits that need fixing. So yeah, I guess like all my manuscripts sort of start off that way. Like the thrillers are a bit different because I've been in a critique group where we've been swapping weekly chapters on the thrillers and like we're all
Mhm.
writing thrillers. So that's like it's a bit different because the accountability is really helpful for me because it makes sure that I am actually writing something new
Yeah.
each week.
Yeah.
But it also means that I'm very like aware that what I write next has to link to what I wrote the week before.
Mhm.
Because I often like write in patches and I'll just like write like a whole subplot just like from start to finish and then I'll go back and start at the beginning and just write the next subplot or just like link in random scenes. So I do
Mhm.
think of my first drafts as quite like a patchwork really, where I'm just like building up like this patchwork blanket all together, but I just like concentrate on like say all the red squares at once or
Yeah.
then move
Yeah.
on to the next bit. So I very much like write by basically just what I'm excited about. But yeah, with this workshopping group, I'm like thinking, well, I can't really do that, otherwise it's not going to make sense because normally I don't write in chronological order either.
Mhm.
So usually, once I'm sort of like having fun with the first draft, I'll skip ahead to the ending and write that. So then, because once I know the ending, that really helps me know the shape of it all more. So
Yeah, and I think that, I get sometimes excited about that too, because then I can see, okay, this is the tone and the voice that they're going to have in the end. So let me
yeah,
see, like along the way, are they getting there? Do they sound the way they should? For sure. So for you, living like you said in a more remote area, what has been the role of building community for you in your writing? Is community important to you? How have you built your community? What do you
in
think
the
about
actual
that?
stories or like writing community.
Your writing community, whether it's people that you share chapters with, like you're talking about, or whether it's people that you discuss craft with, or whatever it might be. Like, have you found community to be important to you, and if so, like
Yeah,
how have you created
definitely.
one?
So, um, obviously I'm in like the group chat with you and several other authors as well.
Mhm.
And then I've got like these two workshopping groups that I'm in as well, which like one's weekly, one's monthly, which is quite nice. But yeah, I think having like a community is just really important as a writer because like it is quite a lonely like job at times because like I'm self-employed and just I just like stay at home just writing all the time and like it's nice in a way just to connect with other writers because it does make you feel less alone in the writing, but
Mhm.
also getting their feedback on what you're writing is so helpful. And like often just having like another set of eyes on something, just like they'll see things that I won't because I'm too close to it. So
Mhm.
I mean, of course, like you become really good friends with these writers as well, so it's just really fun as well just to talk to them.
And so I know recently, of course, that you applied and were accepted to a creative writing program. What made you decide to do that? What inspired you?
Yeah, so I've been working on this memoir about neuropsychiatric illness, and I've I've wanted to study creative nonfiction for quite a while, but where I live, there aren't many courses around here for that. So I was looking at these online master's courses, and I found two that would allow me to study them part time and via distance learning, which
Mm-hmm.
is kind of like crucial with all the pandemic at the moment.
Yeah,
But
I get it.
yeah, like even if it wasn't a pandemic, I would still be doing it via distance learning. Um, so yeah, I've picked these. Well, I picked two courses to apply to where I could focus on creative nonfiction because I feel that my craft for writing memoir needs a lot of improvement because I feel a lot more comfortable writing fiction.
Mhm.
And like I've been reading a lot of amazing memoirs and like medical memoirs, and I was just like amazed by how good they are. And like the story that I want to tell in my one is like really important to me. So I just feel like I need to improve my writing craft for creative nonfiction first. Um, and the two courses that I did apply for, they both are like quite network focused as well, like introducing you like well online and in person because they have like days where you go in to meet people. So you do meet other writers and like one of them, well, the one that I've been accepted to, which is Kingston University in London, that is
Yay.
it's like really career focused as well as being very craft focused, and they've got like a whole critical element to it as well, where like you're reading critical theory about creative writing as well. So
Mhm.
like I'm expecting that's going to be really challenging. So I'm just like looking forward to it because I just want to challenge myself further. And that course also encourages further experimentation, like in poetry and screenwriting as well. So I'll be able to do like more things
Yeah.
than I would ordinarily be doing.
And you, this starts in the fall.
Yeah, it starts in October. Mhm.
Exciting. So you know at least some of what the shape of your writing life is going to look like next
Yeah.
year. How I know with the pandemic and everything, there's been a couple schools of thought. There have been some people who are like, oh my gosh, quit sending out memes about during the plague, Shakespeare wrote blah, 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 or, there's a lot of people who just feel understandably completely overwhelmed and floored by the pandemic. And not only are they financially affected, not only may they be taking care of older or younger family members or children, but they're so overwhelmed by facing the pandemic that their creativity has kind of frozen and their concentration and ability to focus has kind of narrowed down to like 10-minute stints at a time. um, how do you it's so different for everybody, I feel. How has the pandemic affected your creativity, or has it?
Um, so if you'd asked me this like 2 weeks ago, I would have said like it hasn't affected it because I've just been like writing like pretty normally. Like when I'm seriously drafting something, I'll aim for about 10,000 words a week of
Mhm.
new words. And yeah, like last month, for the first 2 weeks, I got like 10,000 words done each week, and it was just no problem. But then I just kind of like hit a wall, and I don't know whether it's because like at that point I was actually drafting an extra thriller manuscript as well, whereas like now I've decided to go back to edit the second one to try and make that sort of like presentable. And I've just found myself really stuck, and there's just so much on the news all about the pandemic, and I am worrying about it more now. So I think that that is affecting my creativity. But then at the same time, in the last like few weeks, I've been involved in more events with other authors. So I've done
Mhm.
like two panels for QuaranCon 2020,
Mhm.
and I've been running book party chat on Twitter where we're interviewing debut authors whose book releases have been affected by the pandemic to
Mhm.
like try and give them a boost in like promotion. So I'm sort of like more involved at the moment with things that link more closely to the pandemic. So I don't know whether that's sort of like subconsciously affected my like creativity levels and my motivation to write. But today actually I did manage to get some more editing done. But I found that even before when I would be editing, I couldn't like sit down for like 8 hours at a time and just like edit constantly. Whereas like if I'm drafting, I can write for longer periods of time.
Hmm.
Whereas, like, when I'm editing and, like, revising, I need to do it in, like, shorter bursts.
Makes
So I
sense.
don't know
It's a
if
different part of your
it
brain.
coincided with that time now of how I'm working, but
Hmm. Interesting. Yeah, that's interesting.
mm,
Yeah, I have found like I can't tell. I'm sort of a natural procrastinator, so I
mhm,
can't tell if I would be like this anyway.
yeah,
I think part of it comes from having more people home in my house than would normally be here, like people who would normally be at school or at work or just
mhm.
here. So that's distracting, and I'm very good at distracting myself. So that's another piece of it. I think I'm struck by this also, as I feel like those of us who have dealt with anxiety or dealt with chronic illness on a regular basis are, in some sense, more prepared in that number one, we've already been, particularly if our anxiety has been medical in nature, like we've already been coping with uncertainty to such a degree. Of course, this is more uncertainty on top of uncertainty. But I
Yeah,
know for me, like I was already kind of utilizing those tools that I had in my toolbox, and I was already having to socially distance and do a whole bunch of stuff. So of course this is more on top of that, and it's since it's not now it's not just me and my personal life; it's everybody in everybody's
yeah,
lives, and so it because of that it is everywhere. It's on Twitter and it's on Facebook and it's on Instagram and it's on the news and it's in my inbox, and so it is hard to escape that for sure. And in the very beginning, I feel like it was really hard for me to concentrate and escape into writing because I was like, well, what is even the point of doing this? Why should I do this? What
mm,
difference is going to make if I sit down and like write, words about my imaginary characters in their imaginary realm when like real life people are dying? Like what? Why? But and I thought about it. I thought, what is giving me the most comfort in these times? And it's escaping into others' creative pursuits, whether it's watching movies, whether it's reading books,
mm,
or short stories, or talking to other writers. And so I realized that, like, the arts, like this very thing that I was giving myself such a hard time about feeling like it was justified or had a point to producing, was maybe something that could give solace to other people the same way as other people's writing was giving solace to me. So that's sort of been, it feels almost like a way to give back in a small way, even though it's not as meaningful as some other ways to give back. I think sometimes in times like these, people need escapes, and
yeah, like,
artists are more important than any other
is
time. Yeah.
important.
So I don't know. I don't know. But I totally empathize with the people who just are like, I can't think, I can't focus, I can't write a word. I totally understand that because
Mm,
it is a lot. It's a lot, and it's an unprecedented time. So, and I worry a little bit about my book coming out being dystopian too, because then I think, okay, is anyone really going to want to read about a dystopian world, in July when we're all living a dystopian reality, or will we all want to read about fluffy, cuddly bunnies? I don't know.
I
So
guess it could go either way because you could get a lot of people wanting then to read more dystopian, fiction to sort of, like, prepare themselves more.
I know I thought about that too, and I thought like, well, what am
Mhm.
I reading? And I mean, for me, I feel like I'm not like one of those people who's like, and now I'm going to watch Outbreak so I know what to do. No, thank you. Like I'm actually watching like Anne with an E because growing up I loved Anne of Green Gables. That's what I'm watching now. But I don't mind reading urban fantasy that has a violent bent to it right now because it's not our world. I know that it's not our
Yeah.
world. So I don't know, but then there are some people who really are drawn to reading, kind of like you said, the dystopian stuff right now because they are like, yeah, this is what we are living, and I feel better seeing different creative twists for how it could go. So yeah, I don't
Yeah.
know. I don't know. It's a very strange place in which we find ourselves for sure.
It is, and, like, nothing like this has really happened before with, like, all the social media available at the same time. So it's like we don't really have anything to compare it to with,
Yeah.
like, how it's affecting society now. So,
Yeah, and with everybody being as connected as we are, I think that's another
yeah.
piece of it, and just the idea of, we're so used to in modern medicine, people being like, okay, well, this is a little different than what we saw before, but we have these tried and true things that we can bring to bear, and they'll work for some people, they won't work for other people. If they don't work for the other people, we'll try this other thing. And, it is a little bit crazy to watch this play out in real time while the
Yeah.
scientists are trying to figure this out along with the rest of us. And it's something that affects every single quadrant of every single culture across
Yeah,
the globe.
exactly.
So I find it ironic, really, that like we're all in this together at the very time that we need to stay apart. It's kind of
Yeah.
an interesting, it's an interesting divide. So I
Yeah,
don't know, I don't know, but that's one thing that I do love about the way that so many writers are connecting online. Like there's what you've mentioned that you're a part of, and then Y'all Fest, which is the young adult fiction festival in the United States. They have Y'all West, which takes place on the West Coast of the United States, and they put all of their stuff online, free of charge, so anyone could participate in any of those seminars. There's another bookshop series that they're running, a writer series that is also free of charge. There's a writer that I know in North Carolina who's doing a lot of YouTube workshops, putting all of his lessons on craft that he would normally, run in his workshop series online, so anyone can participate in them free of charge. So that's one thing that's really amazing to me, is just seeing how all of that has come together. I think there's, I can't remember
yeah,
what it's called, maybe the Everywhere Book Festival. I'm trying to remember, but there's so many of them that are just high quality with incredible authors that are a part of it, that I just feel amazed that all of those resources are there. And, I've watched and participated in a bunch of the seminars and just been like, okay, I learned something new. And so just the way the writing community is coming together,
yeah.
I just think has been incredible.
Yeah, and there's a much stronger sort of like community feel as well now, like more than ever. So I
I
think
think
that's
so.
really nice.
I mean, even just the fact that we're having this conversation and, we're separated by an ocean, I think
Yeah,
is pretty amazing to me. So, I mean, that I have found that heartening. And I feel like, since in a sense it levels the playing field for everybody to connect, because everyone is necessarily a part.
hmm,
So not that anyone ever would want this to be a reason to form new connections, but the new connections that have formed because of it, or the closer bonds with people that might otherwise, of course, be going to their daily jobs, et cetera, et cetera. Those jobs have become virtual. And if they're writing related jobs, and they've become virtual, then part of that is reaching out to people everywhere. And so suddenly, like, someone who is in England is just as close to you as someone who might be across town. So that's
yeah,
been kind of amazing to me.
yeah, and just being able to just talk more because, like before the pandemic, I didn't really video chat with that many people, whereas
Mhm.
like suddenly, like everyone's wanting to video chat. So like if I'm like messaging someone saying, "Oh, do you want to like have a chat later?" I don't feel quite as much as if I'm imposing on them
Yeah.
because like whereas before I'd be like working at home and they'd be out at work. So I'd sort of like crave for like face to face connection. But if I couldn't
Mhm.
go out then I'd like want to do a video chat. But now it's the same for everyone. And like yeah, we all are like experiencing exactly the same thing. And I've just found that like a lot of people are just more willing to video chat now than we were before. Like even like because I was quite worried about video chatting before and like being live on anything, but now I'm not as worried because I know other people are doing it as well. So
I think there's that, and I also think too, like right along the same lines as that, when I read I can't remember who the psychologist was who wrote this. It was just one of those things that like pops up as like suggested articles for you on Google, whatever. And so, but it was about a psychologist, and the ostensible point of it was like, how do you treat your patients when you're just as freaked out as your patients? But aside from that, when I read down sort of through it and was skimming it, there was one line that really stood out to me, and it was about like how it seems so bizarre in a way to be seeing the insides of his clients' houses, and
mhm,
how this was just so, like, he's like, I feel like in a way it's a violation. Like, I mean, he would tell me about, oh, I was sitting in my living room talking to my significant other or whatever. He's like, but now I know that his living room has a brown nubbly couch where the cat has scratched the edge of it. And so I think that, in the past when people would do video chats, at least in my experience, there'd be a lot more like, do I have the perfect background, or what can you
yeah,
see, or and now I think because we're all in these situations all the time, particularly people who might have small children, which I do not, but or pets that are like dashing
mhm,
across, or whatever it might be, like there's sort of been a people are, I think, a lot more accepting
yeah,
of that, and it feels much more natural in a way there isn't that same expectation of perfectionism. So I think like all of our like essential humanity has sort of, I don't know, bubbled to the surface in this way, which is interesting to me too.
Yeah, definitely. And I do wonder whether, like everything that we're experiencing now, whether we're then gonna get like a wave of contemporary fiction like set in this year, like a few years down the line, where it's all sort of like about the pandemic.
I've
And
thought
I
about
think,
that too. I mean, I wonder
yeah,
sometimes about that, like, when I watch movies about like, I don't know, World War II or the Vietnam War or whatever, or there's stuff that's projected into the future, like people imagining when they make
mm,
Outbreak or whatever. Like, I wonder if there's like a psychological or like collective sociological distance in terms of time that has to exist for a culture to really want to consume that stuff, or if not, I don't know. I think now when we watch stuff about, wars or conflicts or things that took place sometime before, you're able to insert your imagination into it because
yeah,
there is that distance. And then you think, oh, well, that could never really happen now. Or, oh, that was crazy that happened. Or when you imagine it in the future, like, oh, well, what if this happened? But then everyone knows that that really hasn't happened yet. But here we are living in this time that is like really unprecedented, as everybody says. Like, I feel like every email that I get is signed like in these terrible times or in these stressful times or in these unprecedented times, like so.
yeah,
And I recently got an email from someone who it was a professional email, and he signed it in these, we'll just say, in these effing bull bleep times, and that was literally how he signed it. And I was like, that is totally cool for me right now in a professional
yeah,
email, because that, like, we are reduced to that. Like, we're just, everyone knows it's okay. So yeah, I do wonder if there's a period of time that has to elapse before that sort of contemporary fiction that you mentioned
mm,
will bubble up and people will be like, yeah, I really want to read this. Or if people are just like, oh my God, no, please. It's bad enough that I have to live it. I don't want to read it too soon, too soon. So
yeah,
I really don't know. I don't know. I definitely think there's going to probably be a bunch of memoirs from people who have worked on the front line in
yeah,
one way or another, that I think are so important for us to read, as
definitely,
if
yeah.
for no other reason than to realize what they went through and validate that and not make those mistakes again.
Mhm.
But I don't know about fiction. I guess we're gonna have to see.
Yeah, I do wonder about fiction, like how people are going to classify it with genre as well, because up until now, I was looking this up recently actually. Whenever you've got like a story about a pandemic, it's often classed as like apocalyptic.
Hmm.
But obviously, like this is happening now, and like these are probably going to be sort of like contemporary stories, like set in 2020. So
Hmm.
it does make me wonder whether they're going to be sort of like forming a new subgenre of
Oh,
like,
yeah. I mean, I wonder about that, and I also wonder, like, or will it be stories that are set in the aftermath of it? You know what I'm saying? So,
yeah,
like, there'll be dystopian stories that are reflective of a future that, okay, so in the aftermath of the pandemic, this reality sprang up, or this reality sprang up, or this reality sprang up. Like that, I could see where
mm,
the pandemic is taken as the baseline for
yeah,
just how things were, and then people go in all the different directions that they could. Like what's that show? Is it Man in the Glass Castle? Did I make this up? Oh my gosh. It's that show that I probably called it the total wrong thing, but I haven't actually seen it. My stepson was telling me about it, and it's the show that is imagining, like, well, what if the Nazis had actually, not been defeated during World War II? What would our world look like? So, here we are in this reality of this pandemic happened. Our world could look like this, could look like this, could look like this. So, and those, I think, it'll be incredible to see how creative folks envision that, because one of
yeah.
them will probably be right. So,
Yeah, that's the thing. We don't know at this stage how it is gonna sort of play out, and it's very much like that feeling of like uncertainty and like not knowing, and like the
Man in the
unknown.
High Castle. That's it. Man in the High Castle. I
Oh,
remembered it. Okay. All right, go on. Uncertainty and not knowing. Yes. Sorry. I was so
yeah,
excited. I remembered it.
but yeah, like the unknown is often used sort of like as a almost as a character in quite a lot of like fiction, especially like
Mhm.
apocalyptic and post-apocalyptic, and where people are like looking ahead and it's like the fear of the unknown. And I
Mhm.
think that really ties in with like what we're living through now, because we just don't know what will happen next, really.
Well, we don't, and I think in a lot of apocalyptic fiction, it's like, well, I think that the people who were sort of like the preppers before, or the doomsday philosophers, they probably saw the apocalyptic fiction with much more of a, okay, this is might be what takes place. But for people who don't feel that way, it had far more probably of a, okay, this is an imaginary future, and yeah, we could go this way, but it probably won't. But oh my gosh, these are the seeds of it. These are the exaggerated, like hothouse flower blooms of if this got to be tended and watered, and now it has. So
Yeah.
now we see. So I wonder about that too. Is like what, creatively, what will that mean to see these visions of the future? Will people sort of see them as like cautionary tales? Or, will people start to distance themselves from them and be like, yeah, well, that was a long time ago. That will never happen again. Or I'm curious to see. And I'm also curious to see, whether these virtual writing communities and book promotion communities that have sprung up around the pandemic in a response to supporting authors and supporting independent booksellers and everything, how many of them will stay? How
Yeah.
comfortable will people be already? Any author who's not like a super duper big name will already tell you that it was challenging to get people to come out for book readings.
Mhm.
And that's why a lot of people do panels, and a lot of people, do like themed events or whatever it might be. So I really do wonder now, where you have that added factor of, number one, we've been able to do these like virtual gatherings to support authors, and number two, people are probably freaked out, like, okay, I have to leave my house to get food, but do I have to leave my house to go to this book event? I don't know. So I'm curious to see what that future will look like too.
Yeah. Certainly be interesting to see what does happen.
For sure, for sure.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know. Do we have more to say? We went like a little bit longer than we planned. We made it to almost like 42 minutes of our supposed 30. So I don't know. I feel like we could talk forever, but I don't know. Is there more you want to talk about, or the things we didn't touch on?
Um, well, there's always things that we didn't touch on. I'm happy to leave it at this. I mean, we can always do another chat like this if there's something else that we specifically want to talk about.
Okay. Well, great. I'm glad that we got to hang out in our little
Yeah.
shared screen world. That you're like, you're right there, but you're not. Actually, I guess you're right there. To reverse myself. My use of three-dimensional space is not very good. Well, I'm glad we connected, and I bet we're going to see each other later on today in one of our little offline writing groups for a sprint. So
Yeah,
we'll see.
definitely. So,
All right. Have a what time is it for you now? It's later, huh? I'm trying to look at
it's
my phone.
5 to 6
Oh my
here.
goodness. Yeah, so it's 5 to 1 here. So I'm gonna go
Okay.
have lunch. Maybe you're gonna have dinner. I don't know.
Yeah. Okay.
All right. I'll talk to you later.
Yeah. Bye.
Bye.